I'm happy to be here with you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the introduction and the language that was curated to bring me up. Feels like alignment to me. I'm probably just gonna be pretty stream of consciousness about this, but I need to find the thing that Shannon just read really quickly. When you talk about disturbance and provocation and disruption, these are things I'm kind of known for, really. Not because I intended to show up in the world this way or because I crafted it this way. It's just that what tends to happen. And so I want to begin by helping you understand a little bit more about me, where I come from, and why I might be here in front of you today. I was born in Denver. My father's Panamanian, my mother is Creole from Little Rock, Arkansas. My Aunt Carlotta participated in a radical social experiment called desegregation and joined 8 other students in Little Rock to desegregate Central High School. The first year that she spent moving through the hallways, being brutalized and being trained into silence, because all of those students had to participate in that experiment and follow the rules entirely. Same thing Jackie Robinson had to do. Desegregation was not necessarily as radical as you might imagine. The folks who were picked to desegregate were picked not just because they were exceptional and willing, but because they had the bandwidth to be abused and not respond in kind. I have to speak plainly about that. Whole families went through a process of training the summer before Central High School was desegregated. My family had to participate and understand what it was that they were going to be, what they were going to allow into their lives as a result of this effort. I could talk to you about the house being bombed. I wasn't there, I wasn't born, I wasn't even a concept yet. But I feel that story as though I was on the planet. I could talk to you about my grandfather staying up all night with a shotgun across his lap because he did not want the KKK to surprise his family. I was not alive, but I remember it as though I was. Shannon talked about the first time that she met me. I'd read a poem, I read it on Friday night as well, for Emmett Till. It took me my whole life to write that poem. I inherited the story of Emmett Till when I was a child, but the language for it didn't come until I was an adult and until I was a mother, and in fact, until I had a 14-year-old boy that was leaving my house kind of blissfully unaware of what the world could do as well. And then there was a parallel between my 14-year-old son and Emmett Till, who was 14 when he traveled down to the Mississippi Delta from Chicago and was brutalized in a barn for hours before being sunk into the Tallahatchie River. My mother was 8 years old when she inherited that story. She gave it to me. I think she did it in the same tradition that my grandmother gave it to her. It's a warning. It's an awakening. It's a terrible knowing that we are introduced to, that the world is willing to be this kind of cruel. So, make me a channel of disturbance. Disturbance. Disturb is, so I'm an etymologist, I'm not just a poet. Language matters, it's very important, it's a culture keeper, it has an agenda, it dictates things. Every single word has an origin story. If you are interested in that, you can find it very easily. I'm interested in the origin story of words because I remember being a mother of 3. And I remember the television being on, and this was years ago, and I remember Prince Harry coming to visit the States, and I was barely paying attention to that I was barely paying attention to the news report about it, but the journalist said, Prince Harry is the ascendant of a king. Prince Harry is the ascendant of a king. And up until I heard that language, I had proudly been referring to myself as the descendant of a slave. Descendant, slave. Ascendant, king. So then right away, everything that I know about language was made available to me again. I know that ascend means to rise above, and I know that descend means to go below. We know that. So how come I was proudly describing myself as a thing that would be below a slave? And a journalist intentionally described Prince Harry as the ascendant of a king, someone who could rise higher than a king. So that moment, that wasn't even a blip on my children's screen. They kept playing. They were completely uninterrupted, but I was entirely changed. Interrupt, disrupt, ruptures. Do you know what that means? A rupture, it's okay. A rupture comes from Latin, and it just means to break. That's what it means. Rupt, to break apart. And so when I think about what I've inherited in my own family, in the context in which I grew, and then what I inherited in the context of this country in which it grew and how it grew, I've been afforded a lot of opportunities to be a disruptor, to interrupt space. If you imagine the physical description of this body, if you imagine that it is supposed to come with subservience, docility, passivity, uncertainty, you would be wrong. You would not have this story correct. We all, each of us, came here as concepts, and then we all, each of us, inherited constructs. For me, that has been a seismically disruptive thing. You know you're a concept because the word conception exists. That's literally what it means. You are your parents' best idea. That's what it means. So as a concept, when you arrive on the planet, in the packaging that you arrived in, you immediately inherit construct. That packaging means, and then they give you the story that your body is supposed to embody or reflect back. If it doesn't, then you are called problematic, maladjusted, perhaps you're even medicated or removed from your community because you interrupt space too frequently. I never bought into the idea that this packaging was some cursed thing. I never bought into the idea that it was something I was supposed to feel ashamed of or bow my head about, or something that I was even supposed to explain. I come from seismic, remarkable, impossible people who did seismic, remarkable, impossible things. And they did it without applause. They did it without an audience. So I borrow the bone and blood of superheroes. And I'm clear about that. What does it mean to disturb space or disturb? What does it mean to interrupt? I'm okay with ruptures. I can tell you pretty succinctly that to be an arts envoy to Cyprus is to participate in translation. The north side of the island is Turkish-speaking Cypriots. The south side of the island is Greek-speaking Cypriots. The Turkish Cypriots are Muslim. The Greek Cypriots are Catholic. The dividing line is the capital city, Nicosia. It is presided over by UN guards, barbed wire. You can still see the bullet holes in the buildings. everything stopped in 1974 when there was a civil war. Both sides say the other side was the aggressor. You can walk through Nicosia and see restaurants with plates, the food molded, still on it, cups. Everyone just got up and ran out. So it's frozen in time. Cyprus, for me, represents a truthful examination of what happens. They are stuck for real. We are stuck too, but we just don't have the same obvious aesthetic. But Cyprus is stuck in a particular knowing, in a particular understanding, and neither side is willing to concede their own understanding. I remember being there and asking, what would it take to mend it? And this woman, she didn't even hesitate. She said, we all have to die first. All of us who remember, we have to die first. And then maybe the kids can sort it out. But those of us who were alive, we have to die first. If you want us to be able to imagine this as better, have the ability to consider this being different. I thought about that. I suppose if you look at barbed wire, UN guards, checkpoints, bullet holes in buildings, I suppose that resembles a failure. I suppose that looks like where things died. But any good farmer or gardener knows that what I've described is really compostable. What I've described is really fertilizer. What I've described is something that is raw and possible, something you can put your knuckles in. And if you have a radical imagination, you might even make a world different from the one you currently exist in. But you do have to be willing to be brave. You do have to be willing to take risks. You will be an interrupter. You will disrupt space. You will be a provocateur to do those things. Because disruption is just about changing normal processes. That's what that means. That's all that word means, is that you are stopping normal processes. If the normal process is to demean others, to isolate, to be exclusive, to be rigid in your thinking, to be unwilling to change your mind, then those things need to be disrupted. I've thought about, and my partner has heard me say this story. My mother, if asked about a recipe that she inherited, that she makes, if you ask her to clarify why she does something, she doesn't know, and she's going to be upset that you asked, okay? So, how many eggs for the macaroni and cheese? 4 and 1 more is what she said to me. So I said 5, and she got mad. Okay, so I watched her make it, and she was doing weird stuff. I didn't understand it. She's taking this bowl, and then it's getting full, and she's putting it over in this bowl, but that one's not even full. Why are you emptying it back? I'm watching this, and then it occurred to me. I realized what was going on. So my mother made that macaroni and cheese the way she saw her mother make that macaroni and cheese, and the pots that my grandmother had at that time were small, and they didn't, and the mixture for her family did not fit in those small pots, so she had to make it make sense. And that was the process. And my mother didn't interrogate it, so my mother was unnecessarily doing it when her pots were big enough. Do you understand? You don't interrogate your history, you'll do unnecessary stuff. Because you saw somebody else do it, right? And you like the way it tastes even, perhaps. But you didn't interrogate it, so you don't even know. You didn't need to do all of that shuffling back and forth. Jackie, your pot's big enough. Your mother's pot was not. How your mother had to make that dish, she had to accommodate her limitations, right? But you don't have those. So why are you still performing that ritual? Does that make sense? So for me, That's how you can talk about politics. What I just did is how you can talk about politics and nobody's upset. I'm serious. These are hard times. These are hard topics. Everyone is well defended around their perspective, even if it's completely illogical. I'm serious. And nobody wants to betray their mother. Nobody wants to betray their grandparents. I certainly don't, but that doesn't mean that they were right about everything. The willingness, the bravery to look at that and to interrogate it beyond the inheritance. Sometimes we inherit stuff that's simply, I'm not going to be able to wear that. My grandmother, when she passed away, she had a closet full. And really, like, some of that stuff, I inherited a good amount of stuff from my grandmother. I can't wear it, guys. I inherited it, but I cannot put it on. I hope you hear what I'm saying. I inherited it. It is indeed my inheritance, but I cannot wear it. I can't wear it. That doesn't mean I burned it. It's in the closet. It's hanging. My grandfather's things are hanging, but I don't put them on. You can make that choice about all kinds of stuff that you inherited. Not just your auntie's fur stole or whatever. You can make that choice about all kinds of things that you've inherited, where you acknowledge the inheritance. But right beyond that, you go, I can't really wear that though. That doesn't really fit me anymore, or ever. It never fit me. This is the stuff that I try to do as a poet and as a person. When you are invited to be an interrupter or a disruptor, that doesn't mean pitchfork. It doesn't. It doesn't even mean marching in the middle of the road with signs, and it doesn't mean any of that. These are, again, inherited templates. You can look at them, you can interrogate them, hold them up to the light, determine if they are still worthy of you. I sometimes struggle with the fact that our resistance movements today look exactly like they did when my grandparents were young, and I don't understand how that makes any sense. My grandparents were born in 1911 and 1913. They didn't have Palm Pilots. They didn't have the internet in their hand. How come resistance today looks exactly the way it did when my grandparents were doing it? We get the permit from the city. We march to a designated spot. We stand in that designated spot. We are loud in that designated spot. We have signs in that designated spot. We stop traffic in that designated spot. There may be some songs in that designated spot. There may be some speeches and poems in that designated spot. Everyone will be fired up, and then we will all go home. There is nothing in power that is interrupted in any real way by what I just described. Not at all. It's performative, and maybe sometimes it even has meaning, but I'm always challenging people to consider that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is something you did in your house by yourself. Didn't nobody see it? You don't have to have these outward, obvious sort of movements toward resistance. This room is an act of resistance. It doesn't have to always be dramatic. I think that'll probably get me to my piece. You got to tell me when I have to stop, because otherwise, okay. I am going to read a poem, but I have to set stage and scene, and it's important. It's always important that you know who's in front of you. I'm really grateful. I've done a lot of extraordinary things in my life. I'm sometimes astonished by the things that I've been able to do. But I also could tell you that, like, there have been so many moments in my own development that were critical to creating the resource that I draw from the most, the thing that I'm going to use in this room today. And a lot of that stuff was forged in fire. A lot of that stuff was deeply painful. Like, it's not the stuff of poetry. You know, I I had all these critical junctures in my life where I moved closer to me. Like that moment made me more me. And in my own specific life, those moments weren't really poetic. I made the poetry from those moments, but those moments were not poetry. Those moments were devastations. Those moments were betrayals. Those moments where I felt incredible pain, incredible loss, where I was devastated, where I was terrified. I spent a significant amount of childhood being terrified of all kinds of stuff. I inherited, my family of origin is astonishingly wonderful, brilliant, capable, overachieving people. But I had 4.5 years in a stepfather's house, and it wasn't like that at all. It was demeaning, it was degrading, he was abusive, and I learned all kinds of terrible things. I learned how to lie, I learned how to manipulate, I learned how to mood alter, I learned how to make sadness look like anger. I learned all kinds of stuff. And so I'm only telling you that because I do think you need to know who's in front of you. I want to share with you a piece that I wrote called Tusks. This poem is undergirded by one thing, maybe two. There was an article about elephants. They are not making tusks anymore. They're being born without them. It's fascinating, you should look it up. And this phenomenon is happening across oceans, okay? So Africa, Asia, the elephants have decided, not chosen, but they have decided that they are not making tusks anymore. When you decide something, you cut off all the other options. That's what CIDE is. You kill off all the other options. So they decided that they were not making tusks anymore. And I thought that was seismic. Why might they make that choice? Why might elephants choose not to make tusks anymore? Right, to preserve the species, because what do we do with tusks? We kill them and take the tusks so we can have ivory jewelry, right? And ivory countertops and all that kind of stuff. So I thought about that. Elephants across an ocean are making the choice to change their DNA to survive this. And if you watch nature shows or like science or any of that stuff, then you know that what you see in nature is always a teaching tool. So if those elephants could make that choice, what does that say about all of us? Choices we've made or can make, right? So this poem is about that. And it's also from my grandfather, whose name was Byron Waldo Emerson Johnson. He was named for two poets, Lord Byron and Ralph Waldo Emerson. My grandfather was right. Resistance ain't no stage performance, no curtain call, no script. Got heroes, though. They're not all coming in hot on white horses, loud, armed, and obvious, but the story has heroes, and my grandfather was one. But let me start over. The word resistance takes you to the 14th century, a French word by birth that means to oppose, to withstand, to hold out against. But we don't recognize these things unless something is on fire. Chapter 1, to hold out against. Poaching began in the 16th century, but yesterday I read an article about elephants being born without tusks, because evolution is the process of radical change in the interest of one's own survival. Sometimes grow gills, sometimes shed them. You're gonna be somebody's meal till you figure out how to look like something poisonous to your predator, till you figure out camouflage. Now you can mimic a mountain, maybe to hunt, maybe to hide from what's hunting you. Maybe you're a carnivore now, used to be vegan till the fruit got scarce. Who you are changes when you're starving, when you're hunted. That's the point. Elephants have been killed for their tusks since before Columbus, so they're not making them anymore. Took them 400 years to communicate this new need and get the body to agree, so now you gotta get your ivory some other way. I'm talking about changing DNA to survive what would otherwise make you extinct. That is evolution, and evolution is resistance. Chapter 2, to withstand. Devin's mother was addicted when she was pregnant with him and his twin in New York. No help, no rescue missions, no interventions. Colonized by an unblessed hunger, she got those babies here. She did that. A year later, a different Black mother living in the exact same building jumped off the roof with her twins. I remember the article in the New York Times. I'm saying it's hard to get folks here and it's hard to keep folks here. It's an everyday miracle, so we forget to be astonished. I'm saying to stay in the body and allow it to be impossible is resistance. Chapter 3, to oppose. Like how my mother was diagnosed with MS and she talked it down, chose to commandeer her body differently. She is assembled from whatever allows you to make that choice. Her little brother Joe was diagnosed with lupus the same year. He was 14 years old when he died. His body could not oppose the diagnosis. My mama's body could. So somehow she resisted extinction, and now I got a body that does whatever I say. I get it from my mama. But mostly, it's 1927. And John Carter has just been killed in Little Rock, Arkansas. My grandfather was 15 years old. They found a little girl dead 4 days earlier, and somebody had to pay for that. So 5,000 white folk went hunting, and they found John Carter outside Little Rock. They pistol whipped him, dragged him, beat him, and then they shot him. They drove him through the city, strapped to the hood of a car. They hung him from a light pole and set him on fire. They broke into Bethel AME Church and stole the pews my grandfather sat on with Papa Joe and his brothers every Sunday. They set John Carter on fire, riddled his body with bullets, burned the stolen pews to keep the fire going. Somebody said they took body parts for souvenirs. A man was directing traffic with John Carter's severed arm. My grandfather walked to work the next day, scalpeled against the horrors of the night before. Soot and ash complicated the sky from all the businesses still smoldering. Police picked up a boy on Main Street for selling pictures of John Carter's body for 15 cents a copy. My grandfather worked at a market owned by a couple who hired him to be an errand boy. His first chore was to cut the binding away from the newspapers delivered that morning and carry them into the store. On the cover of Arkansas Gazette that day, though, the lynching photo of John Carter, body mutilated and scorched, stiff with smoke, swollen, distended, gone. And under that hanging body, posing for the picture with bludgeoning confidence, was the couple my grandfather worked for. The ones whose store he stood in front of. The store he was supposed to walk into. His eyes still stinging from the smoke in the air, the smell of burning flesh still stuck to things, and he's standing there, stitching it up, burying the unlanguageable hurt, a heavy hex, all riot and regret, guttural and unborn, howling on the inside, a spell or something like it, stuffed behind his ribs, blood-stitched boy, always a tourniquet. He managed a morning, ma'am, and a few yes, sirs, and he stayed in his body all day. This is where I remind you about the meaning of resistance: to oppose, to withstand, to hold out against, which is to say, I am assembled from the battalioned heart of a 15-year-old boy in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1927, whose ability to hold out and withstand is the reason I am alive. It's ontological, really. What does your ecosystem require of you? A quality education or a mean right hook? What have you developed or abandoned to avoid extinction? Either choice is a choice. Maybe an acre of scattered bone is your inheritance. Are you making walking sticks or weapons? The community probably needs both. Sometimes that's the tension. I'm saying extinction destroys a lineage. And lineage is a tether, a compass, an arrowhead, a cowrie shell, a djembe drum, a turtle shell rattle, a pictograph etched in stone, hieroglyphs that result in a full ride scholarship because stories carved in rock deserve to be studied and you want to be an anthropologist. Some folk died before the story was passed on. Some mass graves are underwater. Some mass graves are the water. Let the Atlantic say, Ashe, I got at least one superhero in my blood. I know that because I, though middle passaged, exist. Because Grandma Danny didn't die when she was stolen from Guinea at the age of 14. She must have been willing her body in the dark toward a discussion about what could be grown and what should die in the preservation of lineage, because surviving the unsurvivable is resistance. Or maybe it was when Freddie Gray was murdered by police officers in Baltimore and school children fell into the street and the CVS burned and cop cars did too. And SWAT teams with automatic rifles were standing on rooftops and all the major networks were staged on the sidewalk. And activists had flown in and curfews were set. And in the thick of it all were 3 little bitty black boys playing basketball on an outdoor court, laughing, astonishingly free. Because laughter is a lineage too. Because joy is resistance when armed men are on the roof. A pickup game in spite of is a movement when the guns are supposed to be the story. And by the way, etymology of a gun, noun, Latin to Middle English born, meaning engine of war. If you keep reading, you'll see the word missile, the word explosion too. One of my dearest friends was murdered on December 27th last year. That was an explosion. 3 days before that, we were joking on the phone about what a shame it would be when we die on account of all the beautiful art on our bodies that will go with us, and we were right. Cremating Alicia was like burning a museum. She was my most unkillable friend. So I didn't leave my house for weeks. But then I did leave. I do leave. See? I sing what songs I know. My heart keeps working in spite of bullets and what they take. That's defiance. No hashtag for it. The stay and make music anyway magic. The anthropomorphic evidence of Jesus is how we flex these miracles. The ones that formed us in the bowels of ships and sugarcane and cotton fields and killing fields through famine and disease and war. Surviving the unsurvivable is resistance, and sometimes it's quiet. That kind of summoning. It's not a CVS burning. It's what you grow in the dark. The prayers you remember when everything is on fire. The pronunciation of your name. But mostly, it's a 15-year-old boy named after 2 poets, and that boy made it possible for you to exist by suturing his sadness, though his heart was broken when he walked with his head up inside. I'm so grateful that I come from the people that I come from, that I've inherited what I've inherited. But as I said at the beginning, it doesn't mean you wear everything. Not all of it fits. Sometimes the most profound thing about an inheritance is to be able to witness that you have grown past it. Sometimes, and really most of the time, the student is supposed to surpass the teacher. What my grandmother gave me, metaphorically, I use every day, but what my grandmother gave me in terms of some of the ways and some of the choices that she had to make to stay here. I have had to grow past my teacher. And I have had to remind myself that that is not a betrayal. I'm not betraying my grandmother. I'm not betraying my mother. I'm not betraying my father. I'm not betraying my grandfather, because my understanding is different. because perhaps I've grown past what they were able to perceive of. That's not a betrayal. Gettysburg, I've been here 4 times. 3 times? 3 or 4? 3 times. This is my 3rd term. You all are, in some respects, like Cyprus. When people want to talk about you, they talk about something terrible that happened, that was situated here, right? If someone wants to talk about where you live, they usually try to reach for the tragedy that occurred where you live, right? To talk about it if they're not from here. That's how they help people know where you are, right? They invoke the bodies. They say cemetery, they say haunted, they say graveyard, they say soldiers, they say bloody, they say bloodiest. They say precedent setting. And they're describing the context in which you live, in which you grew. So in some respects, I think you're called, maybe more than a lot of other folk, to participate in studying an inheritance to determine what belongs to you and what does not. What still makes sense and what needs to be put away. Sometimes our language has to grow up with us, you know? Sometimes you arrive at an understanding and your lexicon hasn't caught up yet. You know, I find that to be the case for me all the time. All the time. I want to make sure that I say to you that by virtue of this room, the curation of this room, the intentionality of this space, from the rituals that you perform and the meaning behind them, marrying your voices together to say things in unison and sing things in unison, all of these rituals are kin-making things, community-making things. And if you can participate in this kind of activity, then you certainly are poised to examine inheritance in a radically honest way, to try to get an aerial view of it, to see what, if any, traditions you are still carrying that really don't tell the true story of who you are, what your personhood has become, or where you hope to go. So I'm always grateful to be in the presence of folk who are willing to be brave, who are willing to look at, who are willing to be uncomfortable, who are willing to unseat themselves and defy tradition to examine what might be possible in their own lives. I want to make sure that I also tell you that, you know, for me, conversations about race and politics and gender, and again, all of these landmines, you do have the opportunity, as you yourself are examining them, and then when you bring them forward into rooms and spaces like these, you can demystify this process, and you can make it less threatening, and you can make it less painful. You can be human the whole time. You can remember that when you know better, there's an invitation to do better, but most of us are doing what we know to do. Most of us are, right? And when you are invited into a new understanding, then there's an invitation, but it's not a bludgeoning. It's an invitation. Whether you choose to participate or not is up to you. I'm grateful that I've been here with you. I thank you so much for your time, and I want to celebrate you for your bravery, and thank you so much for the kin-making you've already clearly participated in, because I feel entirely welcome, and I feel completely safe. So that's about what you have done. Thank you to Shannon, and thank you to this space.